What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the 5 best iPhones on a budget. So let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to start off with the iPhone 11. I think this is one of the best deals if you looking for a cheap iPhone. This phone is roughly around $300. I can see this phone coming down in price a little bit. But I think it'll, probably stay around maybe 270 if it does go down. I think it'll stay around that price, 270, 300. This is a fantastic phone. I think this phone has aged extremely well. Design wise, I think it still looks good. I actually prefer the design of the iPhone 11 compared to the newer ones because this one actually fits in the hand better to me. It's not as boxy. So it doesn't cut into the hand, which is something that I really like. Has a great weight to it, still feels good in the hand. IP68 dust and water resistant, and I think it still looks pretty good as well. Honestly, if you switch the cameras around, it looks like the newer iPhone 14. Honestly, just with a curve to it. So I think it still looks really good. This one has a 6.1-inch IPS panel. It's 625 for the PPI. It is a 720p display, 326 for the PPI. Overall, the display is fine. Like I said, it is 720p, so it's not the highest resolution, but it still looks sharp and it's still overall decent IPS panel. I think most people will find it fine for watching content. This phone does run iOS 16.2, and I think this phone will get updates for a few more years to come because even the iPhone 8 is running iOS 16. So I think this phone has definitely a few more years of software updates. And then you also have the Apple A13 chip. I think this is the most impressive thing about this phone is that it's still pretty smooth. I compared it to the iPhone 14 Pro, and if you check out that comparison, it's still very fast when launching applications and just remaining overall smooth. It has 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM on here. So even gaming performance on here still does a pretty good job. So if you want to game for the cheap, this is still a really good chip. You also have on here pretty good stereo speakers, really good bass quality, good mids and highs. Face ID works perfectly fine on here as well too. The cameras are actually pretty good on here. Like I said, check out that 14 Pro comparison. It's got a 12 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. The only thing that this phone is kind of missing is there's no like telephoto lens, but honestly you can get the 11 Pro as well too, guys, if you really want that. But you have 4K 60, and then you also have a 12 megapixel selfie that shoots in 4K 60. I think the images still come out pretty good dynamic range, very good colors on here. Video is still excellent, especially for this price point. I think this phone takes really good photos. I don't really see any issues with the image quality with these shots on here. Now, battery life is actually still pretty decent on this phone. It's a 3,110 milliamp battery. It has wireless charging as well too. Basically, even though you get these used iPhones or refurbished iPhones, they typically have battery health above 80, and mine is like 87, and I'm able to get 6 hours of screen on time with this phone, so I think the battery life is pretty decent, especially for the size of this phone. All right, next, guys, we have the iPhone 10s. Now, you can find this even cheaper. This phone, roughly around 250. You could probably find it a little bit cheaper as well too. But this is an awesome phone, guys. So this phone, I think, has a really nice design, pretty much the same as the iPhone 11 when it comes to the body shape. Fits really well in the hand. It's got a stainless steel frame actually on here. It's IP68 dust and water resistant, and like I said, looks really good. These are this is one of my favorite designs. Just has a very classy look, especially the silver color. But this one has a 5.8-inch display. It's Super Retina OLED display. So unlike the iPhone 11, this one actually has a better display. It's OLED and it's a higher resolution display because it's a 1080p display, and it's 458 for the PPI as well too. So it's overall just way better with color and just looks overall better just in general. So I do love the iPhone 10s display, especially for this price point. This phone is also running iOS 16.3, and this one has the Apple A12 chip on it. And the A12 chip is still pretty fast, guys. Check out my iPhone 10s videos, the gaming tests and stuff like that. It still runs PUBG really well. It still flies through applications really well. It's still overall fast, and I can see this phone again getting updates for years to come as well too. So this is a very fast phone, and like I said, it's extremely comfortable to hold because it is a little bit smaller than the iPhone 11 at 5.8 inches. So overall, I just really like this phone. Really, the screen to me is a selling point. Again, stereo speakers on here sound great, great bass quality. Face ID works fine on here. The cameras on here. So what's interesting is it has a 12 megapixel standard and then a 12 megapixel telephoto lens with 2x optical zoom. So unlike the iPhone 11 that has an ultra wide, this actually has a dedicated telephoto lens. So you get some pretty good zoom shots on here. So that's pretty sweet. So you do get 4K 60 video, and then you have a 7 megapixel selfie, but only 1080p 60 video. Image quality on here, like I said, is pretty good on here. Like I said, if you really care about photos, I would go for the iPhone 11. I think it takes slightly better photos, but this will get you a really good shot if you're in good light and stuff. So I don't have any issues, especially at this price point. And like I said, video is really solid on this phone as well too. Now this phone has a 2,658 milliamp battery, also has wireless charging, and again, you can get pretty good battery life out of this. I get close to 6 hours of screen on time with my 10s, and all of my 10s's are refurbished, guys. I bought them all from Amazon. I have those links down below as well too. Yeah, so definitely check out the 10s. I think it's still a really good phone. Like I said, it's super cheap. You can find these 250, 200 really easy. All right, guys, next is the iPhone 10R. So it's sort of at a strange price as well too. So it's around 200 bucks, the same as the 10s. I would say get the 10s, but this phone does have a slightly bigger display than the 10s, so you might want that instead of the 5.8-inch display. It just comes down to that. But that's pretty much the trade-off here, because this one has an aluminum frame. It's IP67. Like I said, it feels really good in the hand. It looks kind of like the iPhone 11 just with that single camera. And this one has, again, the 6.1-inch display. It's an IPS display. It's 720p, 326 for the PPI. Like I said, so display is fine. It's basically like the iPhone 11's display. So you do have on here iOS 16 with the Apple A12 chip. That's the same chip in the 10s, so it pretty much runs just as good as the iPhone 10s. It's very fast, very speedy. Playing games on it is just as fine as well too. So I have no issues with performance on this phone from my testing. You do have 64 gigs of internal storage and 3 gigs of RAM. This has stereo speakers on here, basically same speakers, really good bass, good mids and highs. NFC, Face ID is on here. Now the drawback to this phone is that it's got a 12 megapixel standard. It shoots in 4K 60 and then a 7 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080p 60. The drawback is that there's only one camera, right? There's no ultra wide, there's no telephoto, so that's sort of the trade-off here. But the single camera on here does take pretty good shots, so I could not complain about the shots. You guys can see from here, good dynamic range, good color. Overall, for a budget phone, at this price point, I think it's perfectly fine for just take your phone out, do a point and click, and get a good shot. I think it'll do the job for most people. This phone, I think, has slightly better battery life than the 10s as well too. So it's got a 2,942 milliamp battery with wireless charging, and I like the battery life on here. I'm able to get 6 hours surprisingly with this phone, and again, it'll vary based on battery health, but I'm a light user, so I'm able to get pretty good battery life on this phone. All right, guys, next is the iPhone 12. So this phone is the most expensive on the list, a little bit pricey, around 400 bucks. But if you get a locked version of this phone, it comes down dramatically to like 350, that area. So if you do get it locked to like Metro or Verizon or something like that, it will bring the price down a little bit. But I would say just pay the 400 so you have the freedom of having an unlocked phone. You also have aluminum frame on here, IP68 dust and water resistant. Now this has a more modern iPhone look with a boxy shape, and it looks a little bit more modern. As you guys can see here, it's got a beautiful display. It's got the XDR OLED display, HDR10. It gets really bright at 1200 nits peak brightness. It's also a 6.1-inch display. It's 1080p plus 460 for the PPI. So again, beautiful display, very nice slim bezels on here. Like I said, the more modern design as well too. This phone running iOS 16, the Apple A14 chip, is blazing fast still, crazy fast. It still plays games top notch. It's still going to give you, in my opinion, flagship performance. So it's got 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM on here. Again, very good stereo speakers on here. Face ID, all that good stuff is on here. The cameras are a big step up as well too. So you'll notice slightly, if you're into cameras, you'll notice a step up from like the 11 and the 10s for sure. It's got a 12 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots in 4K 60, and then a 12 megapixel selfie that also shoots in 4K 60. So image quality, like I said, is really good. If you want a cheaper iPhone that's gonna take some really good photos, and you want to spend that extra money, yeah, I would say get the iPhone 12. It's gonna take pretty good shots. And battery life is also pretty good on here at 2,815 milliamp battery. It's got wireless charging and the MagSafe charging as well too. So you can buy those MagSafe accessories as well. So you can get pretty good battery life out of the 12. So I think it's an overall very good phone to consider. Now, last is the iPhone 8 Plus. This is a pretty interesting phone for people who want the big iPhone with the home button that's running the latest software, basically. So that's the selling point. This phone is really cheap. You can find it for around the $200 price point as well. And like I said, I think it's the last big iPhone with a home button running iOS 16. So that's again the selling point. Aluminum frame, IP67. It has again an older design, but I still like the design on here. It's still very comfortable to hold, and it's got the 5.5-inch Retina IPS display. It's 1080p 401 for the PPI. And again, the display on here is fine. Nothing special. It's just it's a good IPS display. Like I said, running iOS 16, Apple A11 chip. It does decent with performance. You'd be surprised. I was using it and it does not lag and stuff like that. Now, it's not the best phone on this list for gaming. If you're into gaming, I wouldn't buy it for gaming. It's good for casual gaming, but definitely not as good for gaming anymore. And then you also have a 64 gig of internal storage and 3 gigs of RAM. You also have stereo speakers, which sound good. And the main selling point, the fingerprint scanner, physical fingerprint scanner, and just having the home button. I know a lot of people just really prefer having a home button instead of doing the gestures. And the cameras on here surprisingly are pretty good. I think the cameras are actually, I was like kind of shocked at how good the cameras were. It's a 12 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel telephoto. It does 2x optical, shoots in 4K 60 with a 7 megapixel selfie that shoots in 1080p 30. And like I said, image quality is pretty good. Again, for an old phone like this, man, I was pretty impressed with the stills that the thing was pumping out. Check out my 8 Plus versus 14 Pro. I think you'll even be more surprised there. But battery life, again, 2,691 milliamp battery, wireless charging on here. Again, this phone gets pretty decent battery life as well. So overall, the 8 Plus, really decent phone. So guys, check these phones out. Links down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.